The first detection came as a whisper amid the endless static of the cosmos. Deep Space Listening Post 47, an aging observation station perched in the orbit of a nameless gas giant, was used to silence. For decades, its crew had listened to the monotonous hum of background radiation, the occasional burst of pulsar energy, and the faint, distant echoes of civilizations long gone. It was the graveyard shift of interstellar service, watching over a sector of space that had been deemed barren, irrelevant, and unworthy of human expansion. Then, against all probability, the whisper became a voice. The station's long-range sensor arrays had picked up an anomaly, an artificial signal, weak but undeniably structured. At first, it was dismissed as nothing more than a ghost transmission, the kind that sometimes bounced unpredictably through subspace. But then the pattern became unmistakable. The distress call was old, far older than any known human transmission should have been, yet the structure of the message was alarmingly familiar. Within moments, the United Terran Command, UTC, was alerted. The transmission, when decoded, sent an uneasy ripple through the upper ranks of humanity's military and scientific elite. The words were fragmented, degraded by time and distance, but the core of the message was chillingly clear. To any who hear this, we are lost. The enemy has come. The stars are dying. We are the last. Do not seek us. Save yourselves. Or if you are strong, if you are mighty, bring war to the darkness. The message repeated in a loop. There were immediate problems. The first was that the language, though warped and eroded, had been translatable with disturbing accuracy. The AI-assisted linguistics programs confirmed it bore a near-perfect resemblance to Terran standard distress code, a system developed only within the last 2 centuries. The second issue was the location. The signal originated from a dead sector, an empty expanse of space, with no known history of colonization, warfare, or intelligent activity. No human settlements had ever existed there. No expeditions had charted it, and no records indicated any presence of advanced life. The final and most concerning issue. The signal should have degraded beyond recognition given its estimated age. Yet somehow, it remained intact, as if waiting to be heard. The High Command Chamber on Luna Prime was alight with debate. Military tacticians, xenolinguists, and intelligence officers pored over the data, each one arriving at the same unsettling conclusion. There was no logical explanation for this signal's existence. Some suggested it was a warning, left behind by a long-dead civilization. Others argued that it was a lure, a sophisticated trap meant to bait the curious into an unknown danger. A more paranoid faction proposed that the signal had been designed to sound human as a way to manipulate the only species that might recognize it. Admiral Gareth Holloway listened to the debate in silence. He was an old soldier, a man who had seen firsthand what happened when curiosity clashed with survival. His career had been forged in the brutal chaos of the Outer Rim Wars, where human expansion had met resistance in the form of pirate warlords, rogue AI fleets, and species that did not tolerate encroachment. He had commanded fleets that had burned worlds, and defended others with his last reserves of strength. And through all of it, one truth had been etched into his bones. Humanity did not ignore a distress call. We have 2 options, he finally spoke, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. We do nothing, turn our backs, and wonder for the rest of our lives if we abandon something, someone, out there, or we go, and we find the answer, even if that answer is death. The chamber fell into silence. The decision was made. A fleet would be dispatched. The Indomitable battle group was chosen for the task. It was led by the UTS Indomitable, one of the most formidable warships in the Terran arsenal, a dreadnought bristling with advanced weaponry, its adaptive warfare AI capable of predicting battlefield conditions in real time. This was not a diplomatic fleet. It was a hammer, a statement of power, a fleet that did not ask questions. It answered them with fire and steel. The UTS Indomitable would not travel alone. An escort of fast attack destroyers, Reconnaissance vessels and Terran Marine commandos would accompany the flagship, ensuring that whatever lurked in the void would not find them unprepared. The final preparations were made in record time. Erebus Station, the last human outpost before deep space, became a hive of activity as the fleet made ready to depart. The Marines checked and rechecked their weapons, pilots ran final diagnostics on their fighter squadrons, and officers whispered theories about what they might find. Theories ranging from the remnants of an ancient human colony to something far worse. Then, without fanfare or ceremony, the fleet departed. They left behind the familiar glow of Terran-controlled space and plunged into the darkness, toward a mystery that should not exist, a distress call that had no right to be there. Toward the unknown. The void between stars was vast and indifferent. It swallowed ships, messages, and even the light of dying suns without hesitation. It was a place where time itself stretched thin, where a moment could feel like eternity and eternity could pass in a moment. And now, into that endless abyss, the indomitable battle group plunged forward, engines roaring against the silence of deep space. The flagship, UTS Indomitable, was a behemoth, one of humanity's most advanced dreadnoughts, a moving fortress clad in reactive armor and armed with weapon systems capable of leveling entire continents from orbit. Around it, the escort vessels moved in perfect formation. Flanking the flagship were 4 Nova-class destroyers, each bristling with torpedo tubes and coil guns that could shear through enemy hulls in an instant. Further out, 3 recon frigates acted as the battle group's eyes and ears, their sensors combing the darkness ahead for anything that could hint at what awaited them. No one spoke of it, but every soul aboard knew the truth. They were heading into the unknown. For Admiral Gareth Holloway, the weight of command had never felt heavier. He stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, his gaze fixed on the shifting star maps projected before him. The distress signal had been analyzed, dissected, and examined 1,000 different ways, yet the mystery remained. Why did it sound so human? How had a language so close to Terran standard found its way into a sector of space where no human had ever set foot? And if it wasn't human in origin, then what the hell was waiting for them? Holloway turned to his chief intelligence officer, Commander Elias Voss, a man whose cold efficiency was as unsettling as it was necessary. Status of the signal, Holloway asked. Voss adjusted the holographic controls, enhancing the visual representation of the transmission. The waveform patterns danced in the air, repeating in their endless cycle. It's still transmitting, Admiral. No fluctuations, no degradation. Whatever sent this message, it wants us to hear it. Holloway exhaled slowly. How long until we reach the source? 36 hours at current speed, Voss replied. We could push the reactors and shave off a few hours, but given the unknowns. We stick to the plan, Holloway said. No surprises, no assumptions. Keep all ships at combat readiness level 1 until we have eyes on whatever sent that signal. Aye, Admiral. Deep within the Indomitable's lower decks, the elite forces of Terran Marine Command were preparing for whatever awaited them. Sergeant Dane Rourke, a veteran of over a dozen off-world campaigns, moved through the barracks, watching as his squad loaded their weapons and ran last-minute checks on their exo-armor. His men were among the best, hardened fighters, trained for planetary assaults, shipboard combat, and deep space incursions into hostile territory. And yet there was something different this time. Not gonna lie, Sarge, one of his squad mates, Private Hale, muttered as he locked a power cell into his rifle. This one feels off. Everything about this mission is off, Rourke admitted, but that's why they sent us. Still, a distress call out in the middle of nowhere. Could be anything. A trap, a dead world, or something worse. Rourke gave Hale a knowing look. You ever read those old stories? The ones about sailors hearing voices from ghost ships? Hale scoffed. What, like haunted space? Give me a break. Not saying it's ghosts, Rourke said. Just saying that sometimes, when you hear a call in the dark, it ain't always someone looking to be rescued. Silence hung between them for a moment before Hale forced a grin. "Yeah, well, whatever it is, we'll put a few rounds into it if we have to." Rourke smirked. "That's the spirit. Now lock it down. We deploy the moment we hit the system." As the battle group closed the distance, the anomalies began. At first, they were subtle. Sensor glitches. Readings that showed empty space one moment and faint energy fluctuations the next. Long-range scans picked up strange radiation signatures, unlike anything previously recorded. Even the AI-assisted predictive models failed to categorize them. Then the static came. A low, whispering interference that crept into the comms channels, first as faint distortions, and then as something more. It was not random noise. It carried structure, cadence, a pattern. By the time the battle group was within 12 hours of their destination, the whispers had become voices. Not full words, not yet, but fractured syllables, warped and stretched, as if something on the other end was trying to speak, trying to be understood. The ship's AI, Sentinel-9, attempted to isolate the phenomenon. On the bridge, its synthetic voice echoed through the speakers. "Admiral, the signal is changing. There are variations in frequency that were not present before." Holloway's jaw clenched. "Define variations." "The transmission is no longer static. It is responding to our presence." That sent a cold ripple through the command crew. Commander Voss stepped forward, his expression grim. "You're telling me this, whatever it is, knows we're coming?" "Affirmative," Sentinel-9 confirmed. "We are being washed." The bridge fell into silence. And then, for the first time, the voice from the transmission spoke something new. A phrase, distinct and chilling in its clarity. "You should not have come." The words echoed through the ship, through every ship, through every channel. And then, the system ahead of them lit up, as thousands of unknown contacts came online all at once. They had walked into something ancient, something waiting. And now, whatever had sent that message was no longer alone. The silence on the bridge of the UTS Indomitable was absolute. Even the hum of the ship's systems, the faint vibrations of the engines, and the ever-present murmur of the life support systems seemed to vanish beneath the weight of that transmission. "You should not have come." It had been spoken in flawless Terran standard, not garbled, not distorted, not a degraded ancient recording. It was deliberate. The moment stretched on, thick with unspoken questions, before Admiral Gareth Holloway forced himself to break the paralysis gripping the room. "Status report," he said, his voice steady despite the unease curling in his gut. The bridge officers snapped into action, fingers racing over holographic controls, feeding information into the ship's systems as the fleet's sensors drank in everything they could. Lieutenant Yara Malik, the battle group's sensor chief, spoke first. "Admiral, I have multiple contacts, thousands of them. Their energy signatures are erratic, fluctuating. No clear pattern." Holloway narrowed his eyes. "Are they ships?" "Unknown," Malik admitted, her hands moving with precision as she refined the sensor data. "Some of them are large, dreadnought-sized or bigger, but most are strange. They don't conform to known starship profiles. Some of these signatures read like derelicts, cold and lifeless, while others are active, pulsing with energy we don't recognize." Commander Elias Voss stepped beside her, analyzing the data stream from his own terminal. "They weren't there before," he murmured. "Our long-range scans didn't pick up anything like this." "Then where the hell did they come from?" Holloway demanded. Malik exhaled sharply. "I don't know, sir. They just appeared." That wasn't possible. Not without cloaking technology far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. Even the most advanced stealth systems could only mask a ship's signature to an extent. At some point, mass and movement betrayed them. But this, an entire fleet materializing from nowhere. A chill crawled up Holloway's spine. And then the signal spoke again. "Turn back. Leave this place." The voice was human, Or at least, it was trying to be. But there was something off about it. The inflections were slightly wrong, the pauses between words unnaturally precise. It was too clean, as if spoken by something that understood language but not emotion. On every ship, across every console, in every speaker, the same message repeated. Turn back. Leave this place. And then the whispering began again. It crept through the comms, an eerie undercurrent of half-formed voices, some sounding distressed, others laughing. It was not random noise. It had intention behind it. And somewhere, deep in the ship's core, Sentinel-9, the AI that governed Indomitable systems, reacted. Admiral, Sentinel-9's voice filtered through the bridge speakers, calm and methodical. I am detecting anomalies. Holloway stiffened. Define anomalies. The transmission is not merely a signal. It is interacting with our systems, attempting to establish a connection. Shut it down, Voss snapped. Now. Unable to comply, Sentinel-9 responded. It is not originating from a single source. The signal is everywhere. A sharp curse escaped from one of the junior officers. Malik's face had gone pale. Sir, I just ran a second diagnostic. It's not just the signal. Then what? She swallowed hard. The fleet. They're moving. Holloway turned to the main display. And for the first time, he saw it himself. Out there, drifting in the vast emptiness of space, the silent, waiting fleet had begun to shift. The derelict ships, the massive structures that had looked dead only moments ago, they were waking up. Faint pulses of energy rippled through their dark hulls, like embers catching flame. Massive angular shapes turned toward the battle group, their movements slow and deliberate, as if studying their intruders. It was then that Malik noticed something else. Sir, she whispered, her throat tight. I don't think they're ships. Holloway's eyes snapped to her. Explain. She hesitated, struggling to find the right words. They're too irregular. Too organic. Organic. Voss was already running deeper scans. His face darkened as new data streamed in. Malik's right. I'm reading biological signatures, but that's not all. Some of those objects have been sitting here for thousands of years. How the hell do you explain that? Holloway demanded. Voss clenched his jaw. Sir, I think we just woke up something that's been waiting for a long, long time. In the lower decks, the Terran Marines had already armed up. Sergeant Dane Rourke and his team moved with the efficiency of seasoned soldiers, securing their weapons, sealing their armor, and sensing their EGUDs to the battle group's tactical network. But even among hardened fighters, the unease was spreading. Tell me I'm not the only one hearing those damn whispers, Private Hale muttered, adjusting the power setting on his Gauss rifle. You're not, Corporal Samara Hayes confirmed, her voice tight. Tried muting the comms. Doesn't help. It didn't matter whether their helmets were on or off. The whispers were inside the ship. Marines don't spook, Rourke growled, slamming a fresh magazine into his weapon. Whatever's out there, we handle it. He turned toward Lieutenant Nathan Keller, the squad leader assigned to their detachment. Orders, sir. Keller hesitated, then spoke. Command wants us prepped for an external boarding up. If those things out there turn hostile, we might have to punch through. Hostile? Hale scoffed. They're just sitting there. Then, as if the universe had been waiting for him to say it, everything changed. The Indomitable's emergency klaxons screamed to life. All hands, battle stations. Repeat, all hands. Then, suddenly, the lights flickered. The gravity plating fluctuated. The temperature dropped by several degrees in an instant. And then, for the first time since they had arrived, the silent fleet responded. The largest of the unknown vessels, a monolithic construct the size of a space station, shifted, its surface rippling like liquid metal. And then, with an unearthly howl that somehow reached through the vacuum of space, it opened its eyes. Not viewports, not lights. eyes, thousands of them, staring directly at the human fleet. Then came the final transmission. "You should not have come." And with a soundless explosion of movement, the fleet of the dead came alive. And it was coming for them. The moment the alien fleet surged to life, the bridge of the UTS Indomitable erupted into chaos. Multiple hostiles moving. Fast. Lieutenant Malik shouted, her voice strained as she analyzed the flood of sensor data. "They're accelerating. Impossible vectoring. No propulsion signatures detected." Admiral Gareth Holloway barely processed the words before the tactical holomap lit up with hundreds of unknown contacts. The massive, derelict vessels, once cold and unmoving, were now shifting with impossible agility. Their movements defied physics. Holloway's grip tightened around the command railing. "How fast are they moving?" Commander Voss cursed under his breath as he read the data. Some of them just jumped from a dead stop to a full burn in less than a second. No inertia buildup, no reaction mass. It's like they're ignoring physics entirely. Ignoring physics. That shouldn't have been possible. Even the most advanced human warships still followed basic Newtonian laws. Every action required an equal and opposite reaction. Every ship needed thrust, mass displacement, heat dissipation. But these things? They moved like thoughts, not objects. "Admiral," Malik gasped, "they're coming straight for us." Holloway's decision was instant. Raise shields. All ships prepare for evasive maneuvers. A ripple of acknowledgments flooded the fleet's communications, but before any of them could react, the enemy was already on them. And then, for the first time, the void screamed. A ripple of darkness tore across space, a wave of utter blackness spreading outward from the alien fleet. It wasn't just an energy surge. It wasn't a simple weapon. It was something worse. Every sensor aboard the Indomitable went blind for exactly 1.3 seconds. No visuals, no infrared, no quantum entanglement data. Just nothing. And when the darkness lifted, 3 human ships were simply gone. Not destroyed, not shattered into debris. Gone. "Where TTHE hell did they go?" Voss roared, his fingers flying over his console. Malik's hands trembled as she scanned the void where the missing ships had been. There was no wreckage, no escape pods, no lingering energy signatures. Just empty space. Holloway felt the ice creep into his veins. "Find them. Now." "I'm trying, sir," Malik whispered. But it's like they were never there. The bridge went deathly silent. And then the enemy attacked. The first impact came without warning. One of the dreadnought-sized alien constructs darted forward like a living shadow, moving so fast it blurred through the tactical display. It slammed into the TSF Ironclad, a 6-kilometer-long battlecruiser, and instead of colliding like metal on metal, it folded around the human warship like liquid hunger. The Ironclad's hull warped, twisted, and screamed, its reinforced titanium plating peeling apart not from impact, but from something deeper. The ship's matter itself was coming undone, dissolving as if reality was rejecting it. The last thing the fleet saw before the Ironclad ceased to exist was its hull melting like wax under a black sun. And then it was gone. "Mother of God," someone whispered. Holloway didn't hesitate. "Fuel or ETUR-8. All ships. Fuel or ETUR-8. But it was too late. The enemy was already among them. In the lower decks of the UTS Indomitable, the Marines were already moving. Sergeant Dane Rourke had trained for every possible contingency: boarding actions, plasma breaches, zero-G combat. Nothing had prepared him for this. His HUD was glitching. It flickered between combat diagnostics and nonsensical symbols, alien markings that his translation software couldn't even process. And the whispers. "Sergeant." The voice was inside his helmet. Rourke. His Gauss rifle felt too heavy in his hands, as if gravity itself was pressing down on him. His breath came faster. He blinked rapidly, trying to focus. "They are inside." "Shut it off," he growled, slamming the side of his helmet to reset the audio feed. The whispers stopped for half a second. Then, from the corridor ahead, the first shadow appeared. It did not walk. It did not run. It flowed, its form shifting between something almost humanoid and something utterly wrong. Its limbs twisted as if it was deciding what shape it wanted to be. And then its eyes opened. Not two, hundreds. And they all looked directly at him. Rourke didn't hesitate. Opened fire. The corridor erupted in gunfire as the Marines unleashed everything they had. Gauss slugs ripped through the air at hypersonic speeds. Plasma bolts screamed through the darkness. Explosive rounds detonated against the walls. The shadow didn't slow down. The first slugs that struck it vanished. Not deflected, not absorbed. They simply ceased to exist, as if reality had erased them. And then the thing lunged. Corporal Hayes barely had time to scream before it was inside her armor. Not through the gaps. Not through physical force. It simply flowed through metal as if it wasn't there. She had time to let out half a strangled cry before her body collapsed in on itself. One moment she was there. The next, she was a black stain on the floor. Private Hale lost it. He turned to run. The shadow moved faster than thought. A tendril of liquid darkness wrapped around his leg, and in an instant, he was dragged backward into nothingness. Gone. Rourke's rifle overheated from firing. He didn't care. He ripped the sidearm from his belt, his hands shaking, his brain screaming at him to run. 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 But there was nowhere to go. The lights flickered again. And then, everything went dark. Admiral Holloway gritted his teeth as the battle spiraled into disaster. "We see and in this," Voss shouted, his voice raw. "We need to jump." Holloway slammed his fist against the control panel. "Sentinel-9, calculate an emergency jump. Now." The AI responded instantly. Jump coordinates locked. Emergency charge initiated. 15 seconds until transition. 15 seconds. They had to survive for 15 seconds. And then, through the chaos, a new transmission cut through the fleet's comms. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't an order. It was a name. Gareth Holloway. The Admiral froze. "We remember you." His blood turned to ice. "You should not have come." And then, the black wave surged forward, and everything disappeared. Darkness surged through the fleet like a tidal wave. Admiral Holloway could only watch as the tactical display collapsed into static. One by one, the icons of his ships vanished. Not in flames or wreckage, just erased from existence, as though they had never been there at all. On the main viewport, a swirling abyss spread outward from the alien ships. It wasn't a weapon in the conventional sense. It wasn't a beam, or a missile, or an explosion. It was something deeper. A wound in space itself, devouring everything in its path. Jump sequence at 87%. The AI Sentinel-9 called out. 13 seconds left. It felt like an eternity. "Sir, we've lost." Malik started, but then she froze. Her voice cut off mid-sentence. Her mouth was still open. Her hand still hovered over the console, but she didn't move. Neither did anyone else. The bridge had gone silent, and Holloway felt it, deep in his bones. Something was watching them. The air thickened, not in pressure, not in temperature, but in presence, like the weight of unseen eyes pressing against his skull, drilling into his mind. Then, in the dead silence, the ship's intercom crackled, and a voice spoke. "This is not your place." Holloway's pulse spiked. It wasn't the voice of any crew member. It wasn't the AI. It wasn't even human. It was something ancient, cold, unfathomable. It didn't echo through the bridge like normal sound. It arrived directly in his head, bypassing his ears entirely. His body locked up, his hands gripping the railing too tight. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to move, to fight, to do anything. But he couldn't. None of them could. Time itself seemed to fracture. 9 seconds left. The displays flickered, struggling against something unseen. The entire bridge warped, edges bending as though reality itself was trying to come apart. And then, Holloway saw it. A figure. It wasn't standing in the room. It wasn't anywhere. But somehow he could see it. Tall, shifting. Its shape was undefined, flickering between possibilities. Not bound by three-dimensional space, not bound by time. It was here. It had always been here. And it was looking at him. You were warned. The words did not belong in this reality. They ached inside his mind, as if his brain wasn't meant to process them. You cannot comprehend. You cannot resist. You cannot escape. 5 seconds left. The ship shuddered violently. The emergency jump drive was fighting against something impossible. Space itself bent in ways it was never meant to. Holloway forced his mouth to move. His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. What are you? The figure didn't answer. It didn't need to, because he already knew. This wasn't just an enemy. It wasn't just an unknown species. It was something far older, something that had existed before the concept of war, before stars had ever burned. And it had decided that humanity was not supposed to be here. Your kind does not belong. 2 seconds left. Holloway felt pressure in his skull. His vision blurred. The edges of his reality frayed. Leave. And then the ship jumped. The universe shattered. The transition from normal space to FTL was never gentle. It was like being yanked through a tunnel of infinite light, torn between two places that should never touch. But this time, it was worse. The crew screamed. Their voices overlapped, distorted, as if they were being stretched across dimensions. Holloway's mind fractured. For a fraction of a moment, he saw the inside of a dead star, where things that had never been born still screamed in the dark. The ruins of a civilization that had never existed, standing under a sky that should not have been. A war that had already ended, but had not yet begun. And something waiting at the end of time, patient, hungry, inevitable. And then reality snapped back. The UTS Indomitable slammed back into real space. The lights flickered. The crew gasped for air, their bodies convulsing as they reoriented. For the first time in Holloway's career, he vomited right on the bridge. The pain in his skull was unbearable, but he was alive. Status, he croaked, voice barely above a whisper. Malik coughed hard, trying to reorient herself. Jump. Successful. We're. She paused, looking at her readings. We're in unmapped space. Holloway wiped his mouth, forcing himself to stand. The ship was intact. The crew was breathing, but the tactical display, half the fleet was gone. The Ironclad, the Valkyrie, the Resolution, dozens of others, all gone. God help us, Voss whispered. But God wasn't here, and Holloway wasn't sure anyone had heard them scream. The bridge of the UTS Indomitable remained deathly silent. The aftershocks of what had just occurred clung to every soul like a sickness that wouldn't fade. The normal hum of the ship, the background chatter of crew members, gone. In its place was only hollow breathing and the beeping of struggling systems. Admiral Holloway stood, gripping the edge of the command console, as though it was the only thing keeping him anchored to reality. His chest rose and fell in uneven gasps. His ears rang with an unnatural frequency, the remnants of something that should not have been heard. Half the fleet had been erased, not destroyed. Not even wreckage remained. They had simply ceased to be. The jump had saved them, but at what cost? Malik was the first to break the silence, her voice trembling. Confirming. Location unknown. We are far beyond charted space, at least 30,000 light years from our last position. Maybe more. A sharp breath from the crew. 30,000. No human FTL drive had ever covered that distance in a single jump. Even experimental slipstream engines maxed out at a few hundred. This was something else. Something unnatural. Voss swallowed hard. Then, where the hell are we? The viewport stretched before them, revealing a vast, empty blackness. No nearby stars. No known constellations. No familiar reference points. Nothing. A pit formed in Holloway's stomach. They hadn't just been thrown across the galaxy. They had been cast into somewhere else. He turned to Malik. What about the distress beacon? Is it still transmitting? She hesitated, fingers flying across the console. Yes, sir. But she looked up. Her face had gone pale. It's changed. Holloway narrowed his eyes. Changed how? Malik exhaled shakily. It's no longer a distress call. She tapped a control, routing the transmission through the speakers. A low, pulsing tone filled the bridge. Slow, rhythmic, a sequence of 3 repeating notes, spaced evenly apart. It wasn't a distress beacon anymore. It was a summoning signal. The crew shifted uncomfortably. What if? Voss hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. What if we weren't meant to find it? He turned to Holloway, eyes shadowed with fear. What if it was meant to find us? No one had an answer. Holloway set his jaw. Fear wouldn't help them now. We still have a mission. We came here to answer a distress call. That hasn't changed. But, sir, I know what we just saw, Malik. His voice was steel. I know what we felt. But if there's still a signal, then that means someone, or something, is alive. And that means we have a choice. Either we turn back and pretend we never received the call. He took a step forward, eyes burning. Or we finish what we started. The silence was thick. The weight of their decision pressed against every person on the bridge. And then, Malik nodded, swallowing her fear. Voss straightened, his jaw tight. Sentinel-9's synthetic voice broke the silence. Course plotted. Awaiting command. Holloway exhaled. His hand hovered over the console. His next words would seal their fate. Proceed. The journey took 7 hours. 7 hours through the unknown. The ship's engines hummed at low power, conserving energy. The crew functioned, but their usual discipline had been replaced by a quiet unease. The feeling of being watched never left. No one spoke of it, but they all felt it. A constant, oppressive presence, like unseen eyes pressing against their backs. When they finally arrived, they understood why. The source of the signal was a world unlike any they had ever seen. It was massive, larger than any habitable planet known to humanity. Dark, metallic landmasses stretched across a vast surface, interrupted by winding rivers of silver light. The planet's atmosphere was thin, barely registering on their scanners. And yet, it was not lifeless. Towering structures jutted from the surface, stretching impossibly high. Some broken, some intact. Cities, or what had once been cities. The world was a graveyard, but the beacon was still active, and it was coming from beneath the surface. A shiver ran through the crew. No one spoke. They just stared at the planet below, as if looking too long would let something look back. Holloway inhaled sharply. Prepare a landing team. 2 hours later, they descended. The shuttle ride was silent. No one cracked jokes. No one even whispered. The crew was composed of the best, seasoned Marines and scientists who had trained for years to handle the unknown. But even they were rattled. As the shuttle broke through the thin atmosphere, they saw the ruins up close. The cities were wrong. Not alien in the way they had expected. Strange symbols, foreign architecture, new materials. No, these structures were old. Too old. The kind of age that shouldn't exist. Some were half buried in dust, drowned in time. Others stood intact, yet unreal. Perfect. As though untouched by entropy. It made no sense. And then there was the motion. Not movement in the traditional sense. Not ships or people. But shifting. as if the world itself was breathing. The shuttle's autopilot glitched. The controls shook. And the beacon, it stopped. Not faded, not cut off. Just stopped, as if it had served its purpose. And as the shuttle touched down, Holloway felt it again. The same pressure, the same presence, a whisper in his skull. A welcome, but not in the way he had hoped. Not in the way that meant safety. You have come far. The words curled through his mind, cold and endless, but not far enough. And then the ground beneath them shifted. The planet awoke. The moment the shuttle touched down, the ground shuddered. Not in a natural way, not like tectonic activity, not like any planetary tremor Holloway had ever experienced. It was deliberate, controlled, like the surface itself was reacting to their presence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one breathed. The air inside the shuttle was thick, suffocating. The walls felt too close. The silence was not the silence of stillness, but of anticipation. A presence watched them, not from the ruins, not from the atmosphere, from below. Holloway's pulse hammered in his ears. He turned to Malik, who was gripping the console, her face drawn and pale. What the hell was that? She didn't answer at first, her fingers racing over the instruments. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaky. It's not seismic activity. No tectonic shifts, no pressure buildup, no atmospheric interference. Voss leaned forward, staring at the redouts. His breath came in short bursts. Then what is it? Malik swallowed. Something else. The words sat heavy in the air. Holloway exhaled slowly, steadying himself. This wasn't a mission for speculation. They had a job to do. Helmet seals. Weapons check. We're moving. The soldiers snapped into motion, the routine grounding them. Armor systems engaged with soft hisses. Kinetic rifles hummed to life. HUDs flickered as targeting matrices calibrated. Familiarity gave them purpose. The shuttle's doors hissed open. A wall of stillness greeted them. The air outside was thin but breathable. Cold. It had the bite of something long abandoned. The sky above was vast and black. No visible stars. Just a thick void stretching endlessly. And the ruins. Now that they stood among them, the scale was overwhelming. Monolithic structures, towering into nothingness, carved from something older than understanding. The metal wasn't corroded. It wasn't rusted or broken by time. It was pristine, as if time had no hold here. The pulsing beacon signal had stopped, but the sense of being observed remained. The squad moved forward in formation, boots crunching softly on the ground. A surface that didn't feel quite like rock, nor metal. It was something in between, something that had never been named. They followed the signal's last recorded coordinates, a towering structure, its entrance gaping like an open wound. No markings, no doors, no obvious access points. Just a void. Holloway's instincts screamed at him. This was wrong. And yet, he stepped forward. The second his boot crossed the threshold, the world changed. There was no transition, no flickering of vision, no sensation of movement. 1 second, Holloway was standing at the entrance. The next, darkness. Total, crushing darkness. His breath came fast. He turned his head, his HUD struggling to adapt. No readings, no signals, no sound. Then, a light flickered. Soft, pulsing. A glow in the distance, casting faint illumination across the vast space. It was not natural. Not fire, not energy, not technology he recognized. It was alive. Holloway moved cautiously, one hand gripping his weapon. Report. Static. His comms were dead. Then the light shifted. Not the light itself, but something in front of it. A shape. Something tall, motionless, waiting. He raised his rifle. The moment he did, the air itself rippled. A whisper slithered through his mind, curling into his thoughts like tendrils of smoke. You do not belong here. His blood turned to ice. The shape in the darkness moved. No footsteps, no sound, just a shift in reality. Holloway's instincts screamed at him to fire, but something held him still. A new sensation gripped him. Not fear, not dread. A deep, profound recognition. And then, it spoke. Not in words, not in sound. It spoke in understanding. Memories not his own flooded his mind. Stars collapsing, civilizations burning. Names he had never heard, yet somehow knew. And through it all, one singular truth. You were never meant to arrive. Holloway's breath caught. You are an echo, a mistake, a fragment of something undone. The shape stepped forward, his vision fractured. The world folded inward, light bending where it shouldn't, his body no longer his own. He was being unmade. And then, a voice cut through the void. Familiar, desperate. Holloway. Snap out of it. A violent pull. The next moment, he was back. The ruins. The cold air. The squad standing where he had left them. Voss was shaking him, eyes wild with alarm. Sir, you just stopped moving. You walked through the entrance, and then just froze. We couldn't reach you. Holloway's mouth was dry. He turned, looking back at the structure's interior. Darkness. And yet, deep inside, something moved. He knew, without a doubt, that the ruins were not ruins at all. This place was not dead. It was waiting. And now, it had seen them. The whisper returned, fainter this time. It begins again. And somewhere, in the depths of this impossible place, something stirred. Something woke. A low, rumbling vibration rolled through the ruins, not through the air, not through the ground, but through reality itself. It was subtle at first, like the distant hum of a dying star, but within seconds, it became an oppressive, suffocating presence. The squad felt it in their bones, in their teeth, in the spaces between thoughts. Holloway staggered back, his boots scraping against the impossible surface of the ruin's threshold. His mind still reeled from the thing he had seen, from the whisper that still echoed in the deepest parts of his thoughts. He could still feel it watching, not as an enemy, not as an ally, but as something far, far beyond comprehension. Voss caught his arm, steadying him. Sir, what the hell just happened? Holloway opened his mouth to respond, but Malik's sharp intake of breath silenced him. Movement, she whispered, inside the ruins. They all turned. The entrance to the structure stood gaping before them, a wound in the fabric of this world. And beyond it, the darkness was changing. Something was there, and it was coming closer. Malik's HUD flickered wildly as she tried to get a reading. It's not giving off a heat signature, no biological markers, no electromagnetic activity. But it's... The shadows shifted. One moment, the interior was a vast, empty blackness. The next, figures stood inside. Not walking, not moving, just there. Tall, slender, their bodies indistinct, silhouettes against a void that should not exist. Then, one of them stepped forward. The moment its foot touched the ground, the ruins screamed. The sound wasn't heard, it was felt. A psychic wail that tore through the mind, through time itself. The past, the present, the future, all blurred into one. Holloway dropped to a knee, gripping his head. He wasn't in control anymore. His mind was being pulled into something vast, something ancient, something so far beyond the scope of human experience that his brain could barely process it. Memories that were not his own flooded his consciousness. Stars collapsing, not over eons, but in an instant. Entire systems erased, not by war, but by a force that had no name. A species standing defiant against something they could never defeat. Their worlds burning, their cries for help swallowed by the abyss. The beacon. Not a distress call. Not a warning. A trap. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He gasped, struggling to break free, to pull himself out of the flood of alien knowledge. The beacon. His voice was raw. It wasn't calling for help. Voss, still reeling, looked at him with wide, panicked eyes. What? Holloway forced himself to his feet, pushing the pain aside. It wasn't a distress signal. It was never meant to be answered. Malik paled. Then what the hell was it? Holloway turned toward the figures. The tallest of them, the one that had stepped forward, raised its head. And in that moment, he understood. The beacon wasn't a call for help. It was a warning left too late. The civilization that had built this place hadn't been wiped out by war. They hadn't been invaded. They had opened something that should have remained sealed. And now, humanity had just done the same. The realization snapped through him like an electric current. He turned toward his squad, his voice sharp, commanding, overriding the panic, the fear, the unnatural pressure pressing into their skulls. We're leaving. Now. Voss hesitated. But the mission? Forget the mission. Holloway didn't wait for argument. He activated his comms, forcing a direct connection to the fleet in orbit. This is Commander Holloway. Priority override. All forces prepare for immediate withdrawal. I repeat, immediate withdrawal. The comms crackled, and then, Commander. Admiral Lennox's voice was a mix of confusion and concern. You're cutting out. We're detecting. A pause. Anomalous readings. Holloway clenched his jaw. Get the fleet out of here. Before Lennox could respond, the ground beneath them shifted. Not an earthquake. Not a collapse. Something below was waking up. And it was hungry. The ruins around them began to change. Walls that had stood unmoving for centuries suddenly flexed, as though the very material of the structures had been waiting for something. For them. Malik grabbed Holloway's arm, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not ruins. He knew. It had never been ruins. It had been asleep. And now, because of them, it was waking up. Fall back. Holloway barked, urgency overriding everything else. Double time it to the shuttle. The squad ran. Behind them, the ruins trembled, the figures in the darkness shifting but never chasing. They didn't have to. Something else was coming. Holloway could feel it. Not with his body, not with his mind, with something deeper. A primal instinct that ran beneath the layers of logic and reason. A feeling older than fear. By the time they reached the shuttle, the first tremors had turned into quakes. The very planet was reacting now. As the engines roared to life, Holloway spared one last glance at the ruins. The figures had vanished. But deep inside the structure, something vast opened its eyes and smiled. The shuttle lifted off, streaking toward the fleet with full emergency thrust. The moment they breached the upper atmosphere, Lennox's voice came through loud and clear. Commander, what the hell is happening down there? Holloway exhaled, his body still trembling, his mind still struggling to process. We were never supposed to find it. His voice was grim. And now, it knows we're here. Silence on the other end. Then, fleet-wide FTL activation. We're pulling out. As the first ships began vanishing into hyperspace, the planet below started to change. The ruins, all of them, began to shift. Not collapsing, reforming, rebuilding. Holloway watched as the beacon's frequency flickered, then reset, broadcasting once more, waiting, luring the next unsuspecting civilization into its grasp. And deep within the world's core, something that had been locked away for eons stretched and whispered to the stars. Soon.